very moment from a tree right over her head there came a loud whoo, whoo, whoo. Poor little pigeon lay perfectly still on the ground and hoped she looked like a stump or a bush or anything in the whole world except a dreadfully scared little girl. It was no wonder she was afraid. She knew very well that this was a sound made by Indians on the warpath, and she knew too that the Ojibways, who were their worst enemies, always made their raids very early in the morning. There was never a day of the world when that might not happen in any Indian village. Maybe it's an owl, she thought to herself, her teeth chattered, and maybe it's the Ojibways. Oh, what did I ever say? I wanted to go hunting with the boys. Why? She clutched her little bow and arrows tight and waited, too frightened to move. Whoo, 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 came the cry again. It must be old Henny Carga, the owl, thought Pigeon. It must be, because the sound is right over my head. She took a cautious peep at the trees around her. There couldn't be any Ojibways up in these trees. They're too small, she said to herself. She got slowly to her feet, her heart pumping like an Indian drum, and made herself look up into the branches. There on a limb above her head, she could just make out a flat fluff of feathers with two round eyes staring at her. Pigeon shook in her moccasins. She was almost as much afraid of an owl as of an Ojibwe scout. She had heard the dreadful stories of owls that flew down and snatched away children and never brought them back. The owl sat still on his perch and looked solemnly down at Pigeon without winking. Pigeon looked up at the owl, and if her black hair had not been tied in two little wisps, I'm sure it would have stood straight up on end. For what seemed to her about 2 hours, the two stood and stared at each other, and neither one of them said a word, though the owl looked as if he had a great deal on his mind that he would like to say if he could just think of it. The morning light was now growing stronger and stronger. Pigeon tiptoed quietly out from under the tree and sped away up the path as fast as her legs could carry her, never once looking behind her. The pink streak that they had seen through the trees when they left the teepee had now grown to a great blaze of golden light, filling the whole eastern sky with splendor. Pigeon stopped to catch her breath and to watch the sun as it climbed up over the hills beyond the river. In a distant marsh, the frogs were croaking, and high overhead she heard the honking of wild geese flying northward. Though she was such a little girl, Pigeon knew that wild geese flying north and the croaking of frogs meant that spring would soon come. She stood still to listen and to watch the big birds that looked so small winging their way far above her in the golden sky. And as she stood there, she heard another sound, a friendly, comforting sound from the village now far behind. It was her grandfather's voice singing the daybreak song. High and clear on the crisp morning air, the words came floating to her. All night the gods were with us. Now night is gone. Silence the rattle. Sing the daybreak song. For in the dawn bluebirds call, with voice melodious bluebird calls. And out of his blanket of tumbled gray, the sun comes combing his hair for the day. Pigeon knew that everyone in the village must now be awake and stirring. The world seemed once more a friendly place, and she was no longer afraid. She ran up on the path, feeling happy and safe once more, even though Beaver Boy and Red Feather were still nowhere to be seen. The path she had followed soon disappeared in a tangle of dry weeds and bushes, and Pigeon did not know whether Beaver Boy and Red Feather had kept on beside the river or had gone off into the woods in some other direction. She stooped down and looked at the snow to see if she could see the print of her moccasins. She found a place, their moccasins, I mean. She found a place where Red Feather had broken through the snow crust, and beyond it were some broken twigs. There were other footprints further on. Following signs like these, she made her way quietly along through the trees keeping sharp watch in every direction for the boys. The woods was very still in the early morning, so still it seemed as if the world was holding its breath. Pigeon walked slowly on, stepping as daintily as a cat over the snow crust so that her feet would make no noise. Still she saw nothing of the boys. Then suddenly her quick ear caught another sound, a queer noise like a squirrel chattering, she thought. She crept on in the direction of this sound and soon came out on the edge of a little open space in the woods. The queer sound seemed to come from this open space, and peeping from behind a tree, Pigeon saw Red Feather sitting very still on a log. In his mouth was a hollow straw, and he was making the queer noise with that. Behind another tree not far away, Beaver Boy was standing with his bow in his hand watching Red Feather. Though she had never been so very quiet, Beaver Boy saw her. He motioned frantically to her to stay where she was and not come an inch nearer or make a sound. Pigeon froze as still as a statue behind her tree and watched Red Feather too. Red Feather had seen her before she saw him, but he did not move. He sat still on his log and kept on making the strange noise. Then what do you think Pigeon and Beaver Boy saw? Creeping towards Red Feather from all directions, they saw little striped chipmunks. Closer and closer they came to Red Feather, whisking their tails and searching with their beady little eyes for the chipmunk they thought was calling to them. They crawled up on the log where he sat. They ran all over him and tickled him with their tails, but Red Feather sat still as a rock and just let them tickle. There were a dozen of the little creatures running all around him when suddenly a loud crashing noise came from right behind Pigeon, and tearing through the bushes bounced old Woodcocker, the dog, barking for joy that he had found his little master and mistress. The moment they heard this noise, all the chipmunks ran away up the trees as fast as they could go. Instantly Red Feather dashed forward with his bow and arrows and began to shoot at them. Beaver Boy whisked an arrow out of his quiver and was after them like a flash. Old Woodcocker bounded about from tree to tree, and if ever a chipmunk tried to run down the trunk, he chased him back up again. Pigeon got our own little blunt-headed arrows and tried to shoot them too, but she didn't hit anything except the large oak tree that stood right in front of her, and even then she lost her arrow. In just a few minutes, 5 little chipmunks lay still on the ground. Red Feather had killed 4 of them, but if you'll believe it, Beaver Boy had shot one of them himself, and in all the great Northwest, there was probably not a single of the boys proud as Beaver Boy was at that very moment. It is a great day for any little Indian boy when he kills his first game. Red Feather laid his 4 little chipmunks in a row on the hollow log, and Beaver Boy laid his one tenderly all by itself further down on the same log. He meant to carry it back to his mother in his own hands. She should see with her own eyes what a wonderful boy he was. He meant to show it to all the other little boys in the village. He only wished his father was at home to see him walk proudly back from the hunt carrying his first game. He was so happy that he hopped up and down and sang a bit of a brave song, as a man did when they came back to camp bringing game. Hail feathers, power and me, I'm a man today, sang Beaver Boy. Pigeon was almost as proud of her brother as he was of himself. She hopped up and down too. Then she knelt beside a hollow log and thumped on it with a stick as if it were a drum. Even Red Feather, who was almost a man and could hardly ever be surprised anymore. Red Feather was about as old as Steve. Slapped Beaver Boy on the shoulder and said, "Tucky, tucky," which meant, "Well, well." While all this was going on, old Woodcocker was still bouncing about and barking up the tree trunks, though by this time there wasn't a chipmunk within barking distance of the place. Red Feather whistled and Woodcocker came bounding to him. Woodcocker was under the impression that he had saved the entire party from great danger, and he was just as proud as Beaver Boy himself. "Wickaki," said Red Feather, "you are an old blunderbuss. You have no sense. That's not a bit of use. There's not a bit of use trying to hunt chipmunks with you about. Now you stay here and keep quiet. I'm going further up the river, and I don't want you along." Wickaki sat down on his haunches with his tongue hanging out and looked pleased and flattered. Red Feather started away at once. "You wait here," he said to the twin. "Keep the dog quiet and hunt up your arrows while I'm gone." Wickaki watched Red Feather until he had walked a little way through the trees. Then he quietly started after him. Red Feather turned around and saw him. Wickaki stopped still in his tracks and began to scratch his ear with his hind foot as if he had never once thought of disobeying. But the moment Red Feather started on again, he stopped scratching and trotted after him. Beaver Boy saw him. "Come here," he said sternly. "Lie down." Wickaki's ears drooped, and he flopped heavily down on the snow with his nose between his paws, as if he meant to go to sleep, but his eyes were wide awake and rolling about in every direction to see what was going on. "You stay right there," said Beaver Boy, shaking his finger at him. "Mind you, don't you move. We've got to hunt for our arrows." And Wickaki didn't move for as much as 2 minutes. But as soon as the children's backs were turned, he got up again very quietly. "Seems to me I smell a rabbit or something," thought Wickaki to himself, and the next moment he was sniffing about in the bushes. Soon he came to the hollow log. "Dear me," thought Wickaki, "I certainly do smell something. It must be down in that hole." He stuck his nose into the hollow log and began to scratch with his forepaws, as if his forepaws, the ones in front, that means F-O-R-E, not F-O-U-R, and with his front paws, as if he meant to tear the log to pieces. "Ki-yi, ki-yi," he yelled. Beaver Boy and Pigeon, hunting arrows under the tree, heard him. "Keep quiet, down, Wickaki, down," shouted Beaver Boy. But Wickaki had his nose in the hole and paid no heed. As Beaver Boy came tearing through the bushes, Wickaki took his nose out of the hollow log, and for the first time saw the 5 little chipmunks lying on top of it. "I knew I smelled something," thought Wickaki, and before Beaver Boy could get to him, what do you think he did? I bet he ate the Right before his eyes, he snatched at Beaver Boy's one little chipmunk, lying all by itself on the log, and made off with it through the bushes as fast as he could run. Beaver Boy let out a war whoop that would have made Grizzly Bear turn tail and run for home. He started after Wickaki, but though he was one of the best runners in the whole village, he could not catch up with him. You see, Wickaki had 4 legs, and Beaver Boy had only 2, so of course Wickaki could run twice as fast. And less time than it takes to tell it, Wickaki was out of sight in the woods, and no one saw him again all that day. He knew as well as anybody that there were times when it was best to keep out of sight for a while. Beaver Boy came slowly back to the hollow log with a face as long as today and tomorrow. All his bright dreams of showing his first game. I'm wondering if I got that doggone thing before I should have it. Yeah. I just looking to see if I had it on straight. Of showing his first game to his mother was gone, and then the envy of admiration of all the other boys in the camp had vanished like a bubble. Not only that, but he was hungry. 4 little chipmunks was hardly a meal for 3 hardy little savages, and suppose when they got back to camp he should find that there was no food there for his mother and grandmother. His mouth drooped, and he kicked the snow and dead leaves in front of him, and he came slowly back through the underbrush. He decided that this was a miserable world altogether, where no one got his just deserts. Pigeon, who was sitting on the hollow log, was just as hungry and discouraged as Beaver Boy himself. She made a place for him beside her on the log, and the two looked disconsolately at each other, and at the 4 poor little chipmunks, and they both came just as near crying as anyone can come and not do it. They were startled by the sound of footsteps, and there right in front of them stood Red Feather. He looked at them sternly. "What on earth is the matter now?" he demanded. "You yelled as if you were being scalped, just as I almost got a shot at a rabbit, too." Then he looked down at the log. There were only 4 chipmunks on it. He looked again at the sad faces of Beaver Boy and Pigeon, and looked about for Cocky, who wasn't there, of course. Then Red Feather knew what had happened, just as if he had heard the whole story. Beaver Boy didn't say a word. He didn't need to, for Pigeon said a great many, and besides, Beaver Boy remembered just in time that no matter what happened, real Indian warriors never complain, not even if they are hungry or cold or wounded or anything. So he shut his teeth tight and swallowed a lump in his throat that felt as big as his fist. I don't know that Red Feather had meant to scold Beaver Boy for carelessness, but anyway he didn't. He just picked up the 4 little chipmunks and glanced up at the sky. "The sun is pretty high up now," he said. "Come along. It's time to go back home." And he started back at once toward the village. When they came to the edge of the open space in the woods where the tents were pitched, it hardly seemed to the children as if it could be the same place. It could be the same place they had left behind them when they crept away so silently in the dark. The whole village was now as wide awake and active as it had been still and asleep in the early morning. Dogs were barking, women were going down to the river for water, children were laughing and shouting and chasing one another in and out among the tents. Smoke was rising from all the teepees, and there was a smell of meat cooking, which proved that the old men had been able to, in some way, to find food for the day. As the 3 hunters came out of the woods, the children racing about among the teepees caught sight of them and came swarming to meet them, shouting at the top of their lungs as they ran. There was White Rabbit and Little Eagle, Foxfoot and Bluebird, Robin, Lynx Eye, and Brown Bear, and many more. The twins knew them all. They were all their friends and playmates. And oh, how Beaver Boy wished then that he had his chipmunk to show to them. If only Wicaka had not run away with his first game, all the shouting would have been for him. He would have been a great hero. If his father were at home, he might even have made a feast in his honor and have given away presents because he was so proud of his son. Sometimes fathers did that. Beaver Boy felt at that moment just as you would feel if you'd found your stocking empty on Christmas morning. His face was puckered up as if he had tasted something he didn't like at all. His lips stuck out and his forehead was wrinkled in a frown as he came stamping slowly up the path toward the tent. "Hi, hi!" shouted the children as they swarmed about them. "Hurry up, old snails, there's a surprise for you in your grandmother's tent." Pigeon was so eager to see her mother that she'd run on ahead and was already far up the path when the children came dancing and shouting about Beaver Bucket Blue Boy. Say, shade to the high chaparral. Could it be that the men were back from the hunt with buffalo meat? Thought Beaver Boy. Or was it venison he smelled? What could the surprise be anyway? He broke into a run and came charging up the path with all the children in full cry behind him. At the door of his grandmother's teepee he stopped an instant to listen to a strange noise that seemed to come out of it. It might be a wildcat, he thought. It sounded like that. But what in the world could his grandmother be doing with a wildcat? He lifted the tent flap, stooped, and went in. Once inside the teepee, he stopped short, and his mouth fell so wide open that if Wicaka had been there, He would surely have barked down Beaver Boy's throat, thinking it was a rabbit hole. This is what Beaver Boy saw. On the ground right in front of the fire sat his grandmother, and in her lap lay a cradle, and in the cradle lay a little brand new brown baby boy. It was the baby that was making the noise that Beaver Boy thought might be a wildcat. Its face was deep red and screwed up. Its little snub of a nose rose up beside a mouth that looked almost as much like a rabbit burr as Beaver Boy's own did. Pigeon was on her knees beside her grandmother in an instant, her eyes alive with joy, and she was saying, "Oh, is he ours? Is he really and truly ours? What is his name?" From a bed of furs on the other side of the teepee, the twins' mother Spotted Fawn smiled up at them. "Look at your little brother," she said to Beaver Boy. "We have a new little warrior for our tribe. We will call him Bright Eyes until he learns another name for himself. Isn't he beautiful?" As a matter of fact, Beaver Boy didn't think he was. He came a step nearer and looked down at the squirming little bundle in his grandmother's lap. The baby lay in a soft nest of down gathered from the inside of cattails, and was covered with a soft white doeskin robe. "Oh, boys, I want to tell you right now, the down that they got from inside of cattails, they didn't mean that they cut a cat and pull the hair out of his tail. They cattails, like they have in the woods, grows, Grandmother was so busy lacing him with thongs into this upright cradle that she did not even look up at Beaver Boy. Pigeon didn't notice him either. She had this wonderful new brother that had suddenly been given to them. Beaver felt more injured than ever. First, that thief of a woodcocker had cheated him of his gain and of his triumphal return to the village, and now here this newcomer was getting as much attention as if he really had done something to deserve it. Besides all this, Beaver Boy was hungry, and nobody seemed to care. His mother watched his face. "Don't you like him?" she asked, smiling. Beaver Boy said, "Yes, a little, I guess. But he looks pretty raw, I think." His mother laughed. "Soon he will be running about. You are a big boy now. He will look up to you. You will teach him how to shoot with a little bow and arrow and to swim." Beaver Boy began to think perhaps it might not be so bad after all to have a little brother. For one thing, it would make him seem bigger himself. He wanted to be big as well as brave. He stooped down and cautiously touched the baby. The baby had stopped crying and was now ready to drop off to sleep. He was so little and so helpless. Beaver Boy wondered if it was possible that he himself had ever been as little as that. The tiny hand closed around his fingers. Beaver Boy smiled bashfully at his mother. "See how he clings to you," she said. "He knows how big and strong and brave you are. He feels safe when you are near." By this time, Beaver Boy was quite sure that a little brother was a most desirable thing to have. In fact, he thought he had always wanted one. He gently released his hand, lifting the tiny fingers one by one, and stood up. He felt very large and brave and strong just now, and it was lucky he did, for at that very moment Red Feather lifted the tent flap and came in, holding the 4 chipmunks by their tails. He looked at the group around the cradle and grinned. "I told you you'd like it," he said to the twins. Everyone had been thinking so hard about the new baby that for a few moments they'd almost forgotten how hungry they were. But now that they saw food, the chipmunks before them, they remembered. "Hey, hey," cried Grandmother. "My son has brought home game. She rose stiffly to her feet, leaving Pigeon to steady the upright cradle, and held out her arms for the chipmunk, her hands for the chipmunk. "I will cook them for you," she said. "Your father snared a rabbit, and he has not gone fishing, so we shall have food enough for today." Red Feather handed the little creatures to her. "Run down and out to the river," said Grandmother, turning to Beaver Boy. "Bring me a pot of water and hurry back." She laid more wood on the fire as she spoke and got out her knife. She did not ask Red Feather to go for water. He was now a hunter and almost a man, and must not do any woman's work about the camp. Beaver Boy took the water pot and started for the tent flap. Pigeon sat by the fire, still holding the cradle, which was almost as big as she was, and smiling happily down at the sleeping baby. Red Feather grinned mysteriously. Come on, both of you," he said. "You're wanted outside." Grandmother smiled knowingly, and Spotted Fawn on her soft bed smiled too, but a little anxiously. Red Feather lifted the cradle and set it upright beside his sister. She looked up at him. "You will go with them?" she asked. Red Feather nodded. "No harm shall come to them," he said, and then she hurried Beaver Boy and Pigeon out of the tent. They found all the children in the village waiting for them outside. "Ho, ho," they shouted, "come with us." They seized Beaver Boy, water pot and all, and ran with him to the river. Pigeon, too, was carried along by the laughing, shouting crowd. "Ho, ho, you have a new little brother. Ho, ho, a new little warrior for the tribe," cried the children. At first Beaver Boy and Pigeon were so bewildered by all the things that were happening about them that they did not remember that when a new baby boy came to the camp, his older brother and sister must do something heroic deed in his honor. When he remembered this, Beaver Boy wished more than ever that he were brave. He stood on the river bank, shivering with cold and fear, for he knew now that he must take off his clothes and jump into the icy water, or be called a coward by the others forever after. A chief's son, especially, must do something heroic, do it bravely. He must not even scream. He must do it as if he wanted to. For a moment, Beaver Boy hesitated, and smoke in the eyes. One of the big boys, seeing it, shouted, "Duck him, duck him!" Beaver Boy glared at him. Never would he submit to such disgrace. Instantly he tore off his buckskin garment, kicked off his moccasins, and running down the bank barefooted, sprang upon a thin shelf of ice that had formed at the river's edge. He meant to leap from it into the water, but his weight as he struck it broke the ice from the moorings. And before anyone knew what was happening, the ice cake was floating out into the swift current of the river, carrying Beaver Boy with it. He had meant to make the icy plunge at the river's edge, and then jump at once into the water and run for the teepee and the fire again, but his leap had launched the ice cake into the stream. He sprawled on his hands and knees on the slippery raft and looked in terror at the swiftly flowing water. He was frozen with fear and with cold, but frightened as he was, he did not scream. The screaming was all done on the bank. He heard Red Feather's voice call, "Jump, jump!" But poor Beaver Boy couldn't jump because he was on his hands and knees. Instead, he slid like a seal over the edge of the ice cake and into the cold, cold water. He could swim a little, but the water was so cold, he had plunged in with all his clothes on just in time to save Beaver Boy from going down the third time. Beaver Boy sat up dizzily. "I didn't scream," he said proudly, though his teeth were chattering so he could hardly speak. "No," said Red Feather, "you were a brave boy. No one can say you weren't. All the other children now began to shout and sing praises of Beaver Boy's courage. They picked him up by his arms and legs, covered him as best they could with his clothes, and carried him in triumph up the path to his grandmother's teepee, shouting all the way. Pigeon, who could run like a spider, got there ahead of the crowd, and when Beaver Boy, with no clothes on and red feather still dripping wet, came into the teepee, they found a bright fire blazing and a gourd full of hot rabbit broth waiting for them. This was a great treat, for among Indians, hot soup was always saved for the old people, and children were not supposed to have any. Even Pigeon was allowed a little, though she had not rolled in the snow without any clothes on, as she would have had to do if the fright about Beaver Boy had not made the children forget it. Neither grandmother nor Spotted Fawn said a word about the danger, or scolded anybody. It was the custom. They thought, as all Indians did, that it was better to be brave than safe. And of course, if there is no danger, there is no chance to be brave. So they sat by the fire and listened, while Beaver Boy told how Red Feather had saved him as the river was carrying him away. And Red Feather told how brave Beaver Boy had been not to scream, and the two mothers were as proud of their sons as four mothers could possibly have been. Then suddenly Grandmother cried, "My water pot! Where is my water pot?" For nobody had thought a single thing about that, and there it was lying down by the river all this time, and not a drop to cook the chipmunks in. She ran at once herself down to the river and brought it back full of water. Soon the four little chipmunks were bobbing about in the boiling kettle, and when late in the afternoon Grandfather came into the teepee bringing a fine large trout, he found Spotted Fawn, sitting on her couch with Pigeon cuddled up beside her. The baby was asleep in his little open cradle on the other side, and Beaver Boy was sitting in front of her telling her all about the Tata and the chipmunk he had killed. Grandmother was stirring the stew with a long stick, and Red Feathers, wrapped in a blanket of deerskin, was drying his clothes on a stick before the fire. Grandfather stopped a moment to look at the cozy picture. Then he handed the fish to Grandmother. "Here, old woman, is food for tomorrow," he said. "Han, han," said Grandmother, which meant yes, yes. "I must put it out of Woodcocker's reach. That dog has no conscience." Grandfather sat down beside the fire, too. He put on more wood to make it blaze up, for it was almost dark by this time, and while he drank his broth and the others gnawed their bones, he told them where he had been and all the adventures he had had. And when everybody had told everybody else all the news of that exciting day, Grandfather told them the story of Ikoma, the spider fairy, and how he lured a flock of ducks into his tent and made them dance to his singing until he wrung their silly necks one by one. When this story was ended, it was time for all good little Indians to go to bed. Beaver Boy and Pigeon said good night to their mother and grandfather and grandmother, and to little Bright Eyes too, and then ran as fast as they could go through the darkness to their own teepees, and Red Feather followed them. The tent was as dark as a very dark pocket when they reached it. Pigeon remembered about Ikoma and the ducks, and shivered as she crept after Red Feather and Beaver Boy through the low entrance. Red Feather at once raked out some tiny coals from under their blanket of ashes, and soon a bright fire was glowing in the middle of the teepee. They were just settling down for the night, with their robes around them and their toes turned toward the fire, when there was a pad of soft footfalls outside, followed by a short, inquiring bark, and where Cocky stuck his head through the teepee opening. In another minute the rest of him followed, and then he round the circle, barking joyfully at each one, wagging his tail and burring down their necks to leave a wet doggy kiss on any part of them that he found uncovered. He was so glad to see them and seemed so sure that they were just as glad to see him that nobody had the heart to mention the chipmunk. Lie down, commanded Red Feathers, and Woodpecker, with a heavy dog sigh, flopped down on his stomach beside him, and in a few minutes children and dog were lying side by side, sound asleep. This is all about pigeon adventure. The children slept all night long in their little beds of fur. Beaver Boy and Pigeon were so tired after the things that had happened all day that if it hadn't been for Red Feather, they would have slept till noon. But Red Feather, like all Indians, he gets up in the morning before dawn, and it was still dark whenever he got up, but he sat up and looked around him. The fire was out. He was real cold, and all he could see in the dim light was two dark shapes where the twins lay asleep. He could tell where Woodpecker was just listening to him. He snored. And Red Feather reached out and poked him. He whispered in his ear, "Rabbit, chipmunk." In an instant, Woodpecker wanted it right away, and he was ready to go chipmunk hunting again. He seemed like he was saying, "Bow out, bow out. Where are the rabbits and chipmunks?" In another instant, Beaver Boy felt the Woodpecker's cold nose come down on his neck, and Pigeon woke up because Woodpecker was standing on her stomach with his tail wagging. He was wagging his tail back and forth, brushing her nose with every wag of his tail. She turned over, she said, "Go away, get off." She humped herself up, but it didn't dislodge him. She tried to, but she didn't do it. He just acted like he didn't even notice it. "Hi-yi, hi-yi," he yelled, and he pawed with his four-footed tractor as if he expected to find a woodchuck buried among the bear skins. There was a small earthquake under the bedding, and Beaver Boy sat up so suddenly that Woodpecker was backed off into the ashes of the fire and stepped on a live, hidden coal, or, like they pop out and it's still hot. "Hi-yi, he yelped again, and this time he bolted out of the teepee to cool his burnt toe in the snow. And by this time, Beaver Boy and Pigeon were both awake, wide awake. Red Feather said, "Time to get up. I'm going fishing today. Want to go along?" Beaver Boy jumped up. "Bet your life I want to go," he said. Oh, he didn't say "you bet your life." He said words that meant the same thing. But Pigeon, she sat up too. I had that too loud, and it's also making a grinding noise, so I'm going to see if I can't change it. Pigeon said, "I don't." And they said, "Don't what?" Beaver Boy said. She said, "I don't want to go." And Red Feather said, "Nobody asked you. You say that's it's a good thing you don't want to go." So she went way back down on the bed, but she did feel a little bit snubbed. She said, "I don't care. I'd rather stay with Mother and the new baby anyway." Red Feather said, "That's where you belong." See, Red Feather was 12 years old and thought he was a man already. And he said, "That's where you belong, but you've got to get up anyway, so you can't be lazy just because you're a girl." And About the time they heard this noise, coo, 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 and it was their grandfather. His job was to go through the camp and wake everybody up in the teepees. Pretty soon, all the children in the camp was awake, and they were outside the teepee in time to see their grandfather light the hunting bonfire with a live coal from his teepee. And they watched the flames sprang upward. All the men and the big boys in camp came hurrying from their tent to this central hunting fire. The food supply was now so low that in the whole village that everyone who could do so must go out for a game if there was to be food for an evening meal. Red Feather and Beaver Boy, they joined the group, and Red Feather walked up big shot, you know. Anyway, he knew he'd killed his first deer, and that made him a hunter. He was still a little boy, but Beaver Boy was still a little boy, but he wasn't sure he would be alive to go. Anyway, him and Red Feather said they were going to go hunting, and this old boy, smoke in the eyes, saw him. He said, "Oh, what are you?" He was pointing his finger at Beaver Boy. "What are you going out to hunt for? Fleas?" The big boys thought this was very funny. They laughed and laughed. He said, "Better get your mother to go with you," said Smoke in the eyes, and everybody laughed again. This was the same as calling him a baby. Beaver Boy got mad. He clenched his fist and glared at Smoke in the eyes. I could just see him, like Nick glares sometimes. Anyway, he said, "You let him alone," said Red Feather. "Yesterday he shot a chipmunk all by himself, and he plunged into the river beside and didn't scream. He's going with me today, and I'll lick anyone who bothers him." Smoke in the eyes laughed, but he backed off towards the bushes. He was afraid of Red Feather. "Sassy as a blue jay," he remarked, but he said nothing more to Beaver Boy, who kept quietly in Red Feather's shadow while the others made their plans. And some of them were going out to look for deer, and some was fishing, and some was going to look for anything that was to eat. And everyone went, after they made their plans, they went back to his tent and ate some breakfast. And Red Feather and Beaver Boy ran back to the teepee with Grandfather. They found Pigeon there hovering over Little Bright Eyes while our mother tied him into his gaily embroidered cradle. They were pretty soon ready. And so anyway, Spotted Fawn and Pigeon all waited for their food until Grandpa and the boys had eaten. As the sun came up over the hills, they stood by the tent door and watched them as they slipped quietly away in different directions. Grandfather went northward along the river path, and Red Feather and Beaver Boy turned in the direction of the field where the horses were grazing and were soon out of sight. Though she could not go fishing with the boys, Pigeon was to have an adventure of her own that very day. You see what they had, that the baby in this little cradle. So anyway, Pigeon and her grandmother went out looking for birch bark to hold a pine cone, looking for pine cones, I had a birch bark basket. And the old dog ran ahead of him. Anyway, he acted like he thought he had to protect him. And Pigeon's mama stayed home with to keep the fire bright. But the grandma had the baby strapped on her back in this little thing that they carry him on. And anyway, the snow was melting away. Grandmother and the baby and Pigeon all set out for the woods. They walked along, and Grandmother crooned to Bright Eyes, and she told him about the robins singing to his mate and about the nest they were building. She told him, now she was telling all this to the baby. She told him that spring would soon come. She told him how beautiful the world was, and little Bright Eyes seemed to listen as if he understood every word. And when they got there, Grandmother said, we'll hang the cradle on this pine tree, safe and out of harm's way. So you and Wakaka will watch them while I go further in the wood for sticks. So she took and bent the limb down, and she put the baby's cradle, it was a place to hang it with, and she slipped this leather strap across the, where it was over the branch. And then she let go of the limb, and she went off looking for pine twigs, And pretty soon she came back with them, and Pigeon was watching her as she came walking up the path. But pretty soon, up at the village, there was a lot of noise going on, and they ran. They took up the cry, woo, woo, woo. And Grandma ran too to see what it was, but it left Pigeon there with the baby, and she couldn't go off and leave the baby. She said, thought to herself, I'll climb the tree. I'll get that baby down somehow. She climbed up on a low branch. Up and up she went until she came to the big limb where the cradle hung. She sat down on this limb, and she's holding over both hands, bending it with her weight and hitching herself slowly forward along the limb. The limb bent more and more as she neared the baby, and she began to feel herself sliding. She tried to stop. She held on tight with both hands and even tried to hitch herself backwards. But the pine needles, which bent before her as she bent forward toward the end of the branch, stuck into her like 1,000 pins when she went against them. Well, she couldn't go backwards, and finally she slid, and her and the baby both fell on the ground. But of course the baby had this thing, this piece that's built over the head. It didn't hurt the baby. And anyway, she took the things and she ran up there to see what they were. And she'd only gone a little ways when her mother came running down to meet her. And her mother said, quick, said Spotted Fawn, what is it? You will see, said her mother. And not waiting to get another word, she took the baby on her own back, and she and Pigeon hurried up the path together. Pigeon and Beaver Boy and Red Feather were in the meadow where the horses were grazing. When they left the teepee, Beaver Boy had said while all this was happening, the Pigeon, Beaver Boy, and Red Feather were just together. Anyway, they wanted to find something that they could do. So they got off over there, and they found this place where they could hide, and they could get some ducks to come up to them. And Red Feather's back was turned to Beaver Boy, and Beaver Boy saw a deer coming across the river, and she wasn't making any trouble. And anyway, Beaver Boy waited till she got right there, and he drew his bow back, and he shot the deer. And so anyway, when they got home with it, boy, he was real good. He was a real big hunter. Anyway, they had plenty there to eat then. And these Indians have a real funny, way. The mother-in-law and the father-in-law never speak. And she can't go to his house, and he can't go to hers. And the mother goes to the grandmother to have the baby. and he can't see his wife for 2 weeks. He doesn't see his baby till it's 2 weeks old. So that's what, when the father came in, she had to go hide in grandmother's teepee to keep him from seeing her. But the chief, Beaver Boy's daddy, he stopped and he put some meat by grandmother's tent. And, but pretty soon, they had, it wasn't long till they came home with it. Pigeon had everything fixed up so nice, and when they came home, he took and he looked at his new little son, their daddy did. He said, "Ha, that means yes, yes," and said, "He is a fine boy. See how big he is," said Fawn proudly. She undid the thongs of the great cradle, lifted him in her hands, and turned him about for his father to see. And so the Chief Two Bears touched his little hands and clung to his fingers. He said, "Yes, yes, he is a fine boy." Though he said so little, Spotted Fawn knew that he was thinking a great deal, and all about the new baby, because a little coal popped out of the fire and burned a hole in the fur of the buffalo hide on which he was sitting, and he never noticed it at all until Beaver Boy started it out with his hands. And now that their mother and dad was both home together, they enjoyed it a lot, and said it was a happy little family that settled out the fire that evening. There was so much for everyone to tell. Chief Two Bears told about his hunting and the bear he'd killed, and then he listened to Spotty Fawn told about the baby, and about Beaver Boy's brave plunging to the icy river. Pigeon told him about falling out of the tree with the baby, and last of all, Beaver Boy told the whole story of his chipmunk and about old Weird Cocker stealing it. Pretty soon, though, it was late, and they decided to go to bed. And so they went to bed. Now here starts the story of them moving camp. You know, Indians move their camp from one place to another quite frequently anyway. But this was the time of the year when it was the time to go tap the trees and make maple syrup and sugar and all. So every day they kept watching the grass grew greener and greener. It seemed like every hour it was a little greener than it was before. So, and the robins flew over, you know, carrying little bits of grass and straw to build their nests. Blue jays and crows, that's of all kinds of birds. But those blue jays and crows screamed, they called around out in the trees, and it seemed like the very earth woke up. On such a morning, Pigeon came dancing down to her grandmother's teepee, singing a happy little song. I saw a bluebird in the tree. He sang a song and he flew away. He'll come back again another day. And Grandma was coming up the path with a load of wood on her back. She heard Pigeon's song. Han, she said, spring is come. And her face broke into 1,000 little smile wrinkles. Spotted Fawn heard Pigeon too, and came smiling out of Grandmother's teepee with the baby in her arms. Yes, she said, the early thaw has come, and if we're to have any sugar this year, we must soon be about it. The chief said so last night. Oh, they go, they're so happy. Joy, 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 sang Pigeon. We're going away, we're going to find the sugar tree. And off she danced to tell Beaver Boy the news. Well, Beaver Boy and Red Feather was his grandfather in a sunny spot by the river, and Grandfather was showing them how to shape arrow points. We're going away, we're going to find the sugar tree, sang Pigeon as she came running down the path. That was great news. Who said so? Demanded Red Feather. Mother said Father told her so last night, said Pigeon. The boys looked at Grandfather. He would be sure to know because he was the town crier. It was his duty to notify the whole village whenever the chief gave any command. Grandfather nodded. Listen well tonight, he said, and you shall hear the words of the chief. Until then, it is better to keep your own counsel. Much harm comes from talking too much. So Pigeon stopped singing. Anyway, they woke up the next day, and when they woke up and they started breaking camp, everybody was working at one time. Everyone was busy, and when they woke up that morning, they popped up like two little rabbits out of the bed, and so everybody was breaking the camp, but the men, of course, they didn't have anything to do with things like that. You know, Indian men don't work. The hunters, they went off long before daybreak, leaving the women and old men to take the teepees down, and so then after they did that, they'd go north to where the groves were at, and they'd make maple sugar. And the hunters would, the hunters would be there already. They'd meet them there, and they'd have a happy summer. They'd spend a happy summer wandering in and around from one camping spot to another as the tribe followed the game. Now, Pigeon Boy and Pigeon and Beaver Boy, they were wild with joy. And even Red Feather showed some signs of excitement. As soon as the hunters had left, everybody had a bite to eat. Preparations began in earnest. The women everywhere were taking down lodge poles and folding the buffalo hide covers into great bundles. And then they Spotted Fawn wanted to be the first one to be ready, for she was wife of the chief, and it would never do for her to lag behind any other woman in camp. The boys were soon back from the meadow, and Red Feather took Sleepy Eye to his own teepee to help carry things from Grandmother's tent, leaving Beaver Boy to hobble Thunder and Lightning. Thunder and Lightning was Beaver and Beaver Boy and Pigeon had horse, and Beaver Boy's horse name was Thunder, and Pigeon had named hers Lightning because he named his Thunder. But she said Thunder and Lightning went together. So they were very careful. They had little Bright Eyes was hanging on a branch of a tree, and every spark of fire was carefully put out, for no fires ever started by an Indian's carelessness. Then Beaver Boy crawled up on the top of the tent to loose the pins at the top, and soon you could not have told that a tent had ever been there at all. Well, Bukaki, he saw all these preparations, and he disappeared. He didn't want to go. Finally, Pigeon found him, hiding down by the river. She pointed her finger at him. "Shame on you," she said sternly. Bukaki looked at her pleadingly and thumped his tail on the ground, but did not move. "Come here, you lazy dog," said Pigeon, and Bukaki came with his ears down and his tail between his legs. He knew what was wanted of him, and he didn't like it a bit. So when they started to leave, they had taken all the things and put them on shorter poles. You know what an Indian travois is, don't you? Well, they had one little travois made of just the right size with crocodile full. He didn't like it. And they had the baby on that. And so anyway, when they got to the water, the mother was Spotted Fawn would take go over and take she was going to go over and take Pigeon, and then she's going to go back and take another one, and then come back and get uh, Wakaka. Well, Wakaka didn't like it. They had that baby in there, and so anyway, he decided he wasn't going to wait for them to come back after him. He started across that river, and with baby and all, well, they finally caught him and got him back, and so they stopped. Grandfather was with them, and Claw is one other man, and he took the sacred pipe in his hands and walked out before all the people. He held it up to the rising sun. He held it to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west, to the world above and to the world below. And as he did so, he chanted a prayer to the great mystery to be gracious and to bless them on the journey they were about to make. This is the prayer that Claw chanted as he held up the sacred pipe. Impervious to pain may I walk, with lively feelings may I walk. As I used to be long ago may I walk, happily may I walk. Happily with abundant showers may I walk. Happily with abundant plants may I walk. Happily on a trail of pollen may I walk. Happily may I walk. Being as it used to be long ago may I walk. May it be beautiful before me. May it be beautiful behind me. May it be beautiful below me. May it be beautiful above me. May it be beautiful all around me. In beauty it is finished. In beauty it is finished. And that is from an old Navajo, an old Navajo song. That's a real one. And so when the prayer was finished, the caravan moved on. It moved slowly and slowly. And of course, they soon they got to where they could get to they got to the river. And so when they crossed the river, that's the time when old Wakaka got so smart. Now they got to the sugar trees all day long. They straggled out until they got to the trees. There was a lot of trees